Imagine waking up in 1943 to discover that the war consuming the world isn't actually being powered by armies, generals, or flags, but by supply chains so vast, so invisible, and so interconnected that no nation could fight without the quiet cooperation of its enemies. Imagine realizing that the greatest war in human history was less about ideology and more about logistics, fuel, and access to materials. And imagine discovering that the countries shouting the loudest about sacrifice were often secretly trading with the very regimes they vowed to destroy. The deeper you look into World War II, the more one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The war didn't survive because nations supported it. It survived because the global economy silently fed it. Once you peel back the propaganda and the patriotic speeches, the war reveals itself as a massive industrial machine kept alive by corporations, smugglers, and neutral nations that profited from every explosion, every bullet, and every mile of conquered territory. Governments could mobilize soldiers, but they couldn't magically create rubber, oil, tungsten, ball bearings, or the thousands of components required for planes, tanks, and warships. Those lifelines came from somewhere, and often that somewhere was a country that claimed neutrality, a company that claimed innocence, or a smuggler who claimed patriotism was irrelevant as long as the price was right. Germany, for example, rose to power with the help of global supply chains long before Hitler invaded Poland. American, British, Swiss, Swedish, and Dutch corporations supplied German factories with the technology, patents, additives, alloys, chemicals, and machinery that made the Nazi war machine possible. Without American oil additives from Standard Oil, German planes couldn't fly. Without Swedish iron ore, German tanks couldn't be built. Without Swiss banking, German gold couldn't move. Without Dutch and Spanish smugglers, German submarines couldn't navigate. And without the tungsten supplied by Portugal, German armor-piercing shells would have been nearly useless. But Germany wasn't alone. The Allies relied on the same networks. The Soviet Union imported American trucks, American aluminum, American canned food, American engines, and American explosives. Britain relied on raw materials from colonies, loans from Wall Street, and oil from the Middle East. Even Japan, isolated by Western embargoes, found creative channels to keep its war effort alive, buying scrap metal through covert brokers, running rubber smuggling operations through Southeast Asia, and using neutral ports to disguise shipments as humanitarian cargo. What textbooks rarely mention is that the world did not split into clean lines of good versus evil. Instead, the planet became a marketplace where every nation was both a buyer and a seller. Every corporation was an opportunity, and every neutral country was a pipeline. Flags changed, profits didn't. Switzerland became the war's financial engine, laundering stolen gold for both sides and clearing payments for governments who pretended they weren't talking to each other. Sweden sold iron ore to Germany while quietly cooperating with Allied intelligence. Spain shipped tungsten to Hitler while buying oil from America and selling food to Britain. Turkey sold chromium, essential for making military steel, to both sides, and waited to see who would win before choosing a favorite. Portugal cashed in on tungsten so aggressively that its economy exploded during the war. Argentina supplied Germany with food, hides, and industrial goods in exchange for technology and cash. Even Vatican-controlled networks secretly carried messages and valuables across borders. Behind each of these channels were corporations that saw opportunity instead of ethics. Ford, GM, IBM, Kodak, and dozens of other American companies operated or supplied factories in Germany throughout the 1932nd and in some cases well into the early years of the war. Swedish corporations traded iron ore to the Nazis with the approval of their government. Swiss companies refined gold looted from Jewish families. Japanese firms like Mitsubishi used forced labor to mine the coal and metals Japan needed to keep fighting. British companies traded with neutral nations that resold goods to Germany. Everywhere you look, commerce filled in the cracks that ideology left behind. And then there were the smugglers, thousands of them, who turned global conflict into the ultimate business opportunity. Smugglers moved rubber out of Southeast Asia under cover of night, disguised as medical shipments. They transported ball bearings through the Balkans using forged documents. They shipped fuel across the Mediterranean by bribing port officials. They carried weapons across mountain passes and sold to both sides within the same week. Their routes were so effective that intelligence agencies often tracked the smugglers instead of the armies. Following the cargo told them more about the war's future than any speech from a dictator. This hidden world shaped the outcome of the war more than most generals ever admitted. When Germany lost access to tungsten, its anti-tank shells became weaker and less effective. When Japan lost access to rubber, its aircraft, tires, and vehicle parts deteriorated. When the Allies gained access to Middle Eastern oil and American manufacturing, their supply chains grew stronger than any battlefield victory. World War II wasn't won by bravery alone, it was won by supply dominance. And those supply chains were controlled by the same actors who always control global trade: financiers, corporations, middlemen, and neutral governments, who positioned themselves perfectly between buyers and sellers. The war may have been fought by nations, but it was sustained by markets. By 1945, the countries with the strongest industrial bases, not the largest armies, emerged victorious. The United States' steel, oil, and manufacturing power dwarfed the Axis. The Soviet Union's ability to relocate factories saved its war effort. Britain survived only because its supply lines from America remained open. Germany and Japan collapsed because their access to materials collapsed first. No matter how skilled their soldiers were, no army can fight without fuel, metal, food, rubber, and ammunition. What makes this story even more disturbing is what happened after the war. The same corporations that supplied both sides went on to dominate the new global economy. The neutral nations that profited emerged richer than ever. The smugglers became intelligence assets. The bankers who moved gold became architects of the modern financial system. The pipelines that fed the war became the pipelines that shaped the post-war world. The lesson is unsettling but clear. Wars aren't fought in isolation. They are supply chain events disguised as military events. They depend not on patriotism, but on logistics. And they survive not because nations want them to, but because global commerce quietly adapts to keep them alive. When you follow the supply chains of World War II, you stop seeing the conflict as a battle between good and evil. You start seeing it as a global industrial organism, fed by nations that claimed neutrality, corporations that claimed innocence, and a world economy that claimed inevitability. The war didn't just reshape the world economy reshaped the war. And once you understand that, you begin to see modern conflicts differently too. Not as isolated tragedies, but as the final destinations of supply chains that begin long before the first shot is fired.